Now, I want to talk about something that I've heard a lot growing up from someone from a working class background, or as we say, the working poor. I've often hear a lot of parents tell their children, when you finish high school or university, you should go and find a job. You should get a job and be productive in society, and so on and so forth. Go and learn a trade and all this kind of stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not knocking it. There's nothing actually wrong with that at all, especially if you come from a family background which is strapped for budget and is poor and struggling. And if more members are going out and working and earning, you can contribute towards the family and so on. And I understand all of that. Such families wouldn't be able to afford to send their child to, sort of like higher education like university and so on, unless they get a scholarship or a grant to be able to, get the education, whether it's sports or so on, or you excel academically and you get some kind of scholarship or grant. So minus that out the equation, most working class would opt for telling their child to be productive, go out there in society, learn a trade, learn a job, or, be an entrepreneur, create your own business and so on. And all these are good things, but I couldn't help but sit back and look and observe and think, you know what, with all the friends I grew up with, rich and poor and middle class, when we all sort of sit around and discuss with each other, things like this, I've realized that the rich and the wealthy is not telling their children that when you finish high school or secondary school, you must go find a job and be productive, and learn a trade and all this kind of stuff. They're telling them that when you finish high school or secondary school, because in the UK, secondary school is the same thing as high school in the United States. So just to clear up that confusion, they're being told when you finish secondary school, you're going to go straight to university. You're going to do your degree, in the UK, 3 years. In America, it's 4 years. Then you're going to do your master's, and dare I say, you go on and do your PhD, your doctorate. Now, this is how they're breeding and breeding their children for the future. I do understand the position of, budget and cost and so on. And I've mentioned that already earlier in this video, so I'm not going to go into that in any more detail. But the thing is, they're literally grooming their children to be bosses, whilst we're like worker ants. We're grooming our children to become exactly like what we are, the worker ants. And if you want the working class, us, to break that mold, we have to start teaching and training our children differently. We can't do the same thing the previous 5-6 generations been doing and expect a different result. We have to change our mode of thinking. And I say that because there's a lot of situations where it seems as if, especially within the working class, they seem to think that there is an option between finding a job and or setting up your own business, as opposed to going to university and doing a degree or master's or whatever and getting an extremely good job with a good high salary. And my take on it is they're not either or, it can be and. So in other words, you can go to university and do your degree or your master's or your PhD if you want to take it that far and get your doctorate, and then after that you can go and set up your own business. You can be an entrepreneur. You don't really actually, I would even argue that it will be put you in a much better space going forwards if you have that qualification, especially in the area in which you want to set up your business in, and you've actually studied and get a degree or a master's in that area. That would help you a lot more. You educated yourself a lot more to that higher level, so it would obviously help you, as opposed to someone who comes out of high school or secondary school with an O-level or A-level education and they're really not prepared to face the more intricate details of that particular profession that they choose to set up a business in and be an entrepreneur and be a business person in. And okay, you learn as you go along and you're going to have mistakes along the way. Richard Branson's had mistakes before he became a millionaire or billionaire. And most millionaires and billionaires will give you a similar story where they've failed quite a few times before they actually became successful and be the sort of mogul that they are today. So whilst I'm not saying it's a bad idea to tell your child to go and find a job just after secondary school, the other thing I also notice is, in many cases, I would say 8 to 9 times out of 10, a child that leaves, secondary school or high school, when they go out and find a job because their parents are literally pushing them out the house before their time to go and find a job and be productive and learn a trade and do all these things, they tend to end up in dead-end jobs. In other words, jobs with no long-term career, with no career prospects. Jobs where, it's the local McDonald's or the local Walmart or B&Q or whatever the case may be, or PC World or whatever the job may be, and there's a glass ceiling. So even if they work their way up within these these dead-end jobs. The glass ceiling is very short, or low, should I say. So they can't go very high, and it takes them an extremely long time to move to take a relatively small step within a company in terms of their career. And if you compare it to, say, a student who goes to university, let's just break this down. I've seen situations where what's the average it would take you from say, let's say you go and work for Walmart or whatever company you got, KFC or whatever. How long would it take you if you stay in that job for, say, 10 years for you to be like a regional manager or an area manager, or even be one of the board of executive or somebody like that? How long do you think it would take you to get to that position, if at all? Exactly. It would take you a long time. Now let's compare that to, say, someone who goes to university, to study. Now in the UK, as I said, it's 3 years for your degree. In America, it's 4 years. Say an extra year to do your masters and specialize in whatever you want to do, and then another maybe 4 years, 3 to 4 years, maybe 5 years. It all depends on the type of PhD that you're doing. So we're looking at the better part of 4 and 3, 7, and then another one, 8. So we're looking at about 8 years, roughly average. Maybe in America it's, maybe 9 or 8 or whatever as well. Depending on, as I say, it all depends on what your course is and the length of time required to do it. So we're looking at an average of that time. So even within that time, they'll graduate. If they go as far as a PhD, even when they come out, they'll immediately be your children's bosses going forwards. If they're wealthy, then obviously they'll take over the family business, or they'll set up their own business, and they're highly qualified in the business that they're going to venture into. So they'll be the success rate for them is much higher going forward. It's not guaranteed, and I understand that, but it's much higher. So and even if business doesn't work out, as in many cases it doesn't, then at least you have that qualification you can fall back on to go to the 9-to-5 job and get a relatively good salary to live on and feed your family, whilst you then sort of try again a second time to set up your business, because sometimes you have to take several tries before you actually strike gold, so to speak. So my suggestion is, we as a community need to stop telling, especially within the working class, need to stop telling our children to, when they're at high school and secondary school and they're not even finished yet, they're in 4th form, 5th form, whatever, maybe up 6th form, and we're already planting the seeds of go and find a job XYZ. Why not tell them to go to university? Okay, I understand, as I said, if you're strapped for cash and your family is a low budget family and you don't have the money like that and you can't get a grant or a scholarship from the government or from the institution, I understand that. But if that's not the case for you, but you're still pushing your child out just to go and find a job, just to work, so you can tell your neighbors, yeah, my child has graduated from high school and he's working down the local so and so, or he's doing this, that, and the third. To me, that's setting them up to end up in a dead-end job. At least even if they finish at university, whatever they study, if they then go and work for Walmart or whatever, most likely they're going to work in a very managerial position. Even if they don't work in a managerial position and they work in a more sort of lower position, if you like, they still have that certificate that they can fall back on. So whenever they're fed up with working in that dead-end job, they can say, right, I've had enough, work experience, whatever the case may be. They can then start pursuing other things they need to do. The options is there for them. It's a tool for them to use. And that's my point, because this is something that the rich and wealthy has been drumming into their children from day one. You rarely hear them saying, when my child finish high school or university, he must go out and find a job and be productive in society. In that respect, he'll be productive in society, but only after he finishes his university education. And this leads me on to one quick bit I want to say. I'll try and see if I can knock this out in a couple of minutes, and that is, in the UK, for instance, higher education, to do your degree and so on at university used to be free, but then they brought in tuition fees, which means a lot of the working class and the working poor, as we say, can't afford those tuition fees. So these students end up in debt, and because they end up in debt, it's a situation where it's discouraging other working class parents or students to go ahead and go for that higher education, not because they don't academically have the ability to take the job on, it's because they don't have the financial ability to cope with the debt. And that, going forwards, coming out of university, is basically going to put them in a position where you go out in society with your degree or your masters or whatever, and you already owe £40,000, £50,000 in student loans and student debt, which in reality, I work in the financial sector, and it's going to be like one of those areas where I know how the financial sector works. And if you're coming in with debt already, you know, you're young, you're a young family, you want to buy a house, you want to take out a mortgage, you already have a debt, there's aggregate lending to think about, there's responsible lending to think about. And I know I've mentioned in a previous video that I'm a qualified software engineer, but I worked in that area for quite some years, and then I decided to switch and go into the financial sector, and it's another story I might tell another time. And that led me over to go into the financial sector. So, you know, but that's another story for another time. I've deviated long enough. So the point I'm trying to make to you is we as parents need to stop telling our children to just find a job as soon as they finish high school and secondary school. They're not yet equipped for the world. A degree today might not worth much in 10-50 years time. A level or O level today might worth nothing in 30-40 years time from now. We don't know. So the best thing is, when your child finishes high school or secondary school, try and encourage them to go on to higher education at university. And dare I say, go ahead and do it, even if it's going to land you in a lot of debt. You can sort out how you're going to pay the debt later on, because there are certain criteria as to when you pay, how much you pay, or if you pay anything at all, depending on your circumstances. So I would always say go ahead and do that, and you know, and change the dynamics of how you breed or bred the next generation of bosses and entrepreneurs, if you like. You don't have to have a situation where either you learn a trade or you go and be a entrepreneur and create your own business as one option, or you go to university and get a degree and then you can go and find a job in a nice corporation and get good salary. No, you can whether you want to be a carpenter, a plumber, or whatever, it doesn't stop you from going out and do your degree in whatever it is you want to do, and then you can go back and do a trade or become a plumber or run your own business or be an entrepreneur, do whatever you want to do. At least this time you have the best of both worlds. So that's something to consider. So on that point, I'll leave it there.